We thought we had a lot of rituals. Not close, you know.
Oh, good.
Can I turn the air on, or are you going to?
Certainly.
How do I do it?
I think actually that one over there, that
Oh, okay.
is a better shot at it actually cooling down than that one.
Oh, that helps.
Oh, we run upstairs and get our worksheets real quick. Okay. I'll be right back.
You guys look close here.
69 Minnesota.
Oh, okay.
It's not.
It's not hard.
8 minutes.
Yeah. I know when I lived on,
Over the
Yeah.
Western District.
that's what I used to do for Louise. Western 69, so now I'm on 49th, so I'm not 41st Street. I try to avoid it if at all
Yes.
possible, especially at noon.
Well, now, we try to come around Minnesota or Western all the time because that Minnesota is tore up.
Yep.
And the other day we come by there, we were going home, the cars were backed up from 57, just about all the way to 69.
Wow. Have they gotten half of it done yet?
No.
Kind of like 49, they just switched that one over, they just started
I
that.
think maybe by the first part of October, they might be.
So they probably won't get the second half.
No,
See, and they started on the second half of 49th, but I read where they said the second half was gonna go faster. Because most of the big stuff is in there now,
Yeah.
so. But still, it's, wow.
Everywhere you go.
Oh, I know it, no matter where you go, they did finally open up Kiwanis, so that's gotta help Western, because Western was such a mess with
Yeah.
Minnesota and
Mhm.
Kiwanis were both under construction. You must have this online too.
That's what I was thinking.
Last week, that's what he did, he just talked like to the camera most of the time.
Mhm.
Did you guys come on Wednesday night?
Not yet.
I haven't either. I'm figuring I've done enough with what I'm doing now. I went to a volleyball game with my granddaughter, Howard, the other night. Yeah, that's enough of that. I'm not gonna drive home with that anymore. It's dark and the bugs were terrible. You can see every time you met a car, and on 42, you hit a lot of cars, so. Patricia said, no, I can't do that late anymore.
Yeah, because it's getting dark early.
Yeah, when they have home games at Meadow, I stay overnight. I won't come home then.
Okay.
I can't go to these other towns anymore. It's starting to get dark too early.
Yeah, I'm like you. I don't like driving in the dark.
The bugs are always so terrible at night too, and you just can't see. Deer can jump out so fast.
Zach's car.
Boy, it don't take much to wreck a car either.
They live in Indiana and they were out in the hills for a wedding. And they were coming back, Zach's like, what, 22, 23. And just outside of Cadoga, I think is where they said it happened. It was in a construction zone. And
There
the,
were one lane.
Yeah.
so it was one lane, and the guy ahead of them hit a deer. And I don't know where he went out of the way, but Zach was right behind him. There was no way, so he went right up over the top of the deer,
Ooh.
took out everything. He totaled his car.
Shoot.
Oil pan,
Oh,
muffler,
no.
everything it tore out from there. And that was in a construction zone, one lane. It blocked the interstate.
Oh, yeah.
And they were headed back to Indiana. So
And
then
they
they
had
had
to
to,
find something to get
Yeah.
involved.
so then they had to go back to Rapid.
It just so happened their dad was still in Rapid. He hadn't left yet. And their aunt was about 3 miles ahead of them, so they called. And she turned around, and then his dad come from Rapid and got the tow truck.
So then they had to fly home.
Yeah, and then they had to fly home, and they ran into all kinds of trouble with that. The only flight they could get out of Rapid City had to go to Dallas first.
Oh, my gosh, that's ridiculous. It's been to Chicago.
They got to, what, someplace in
Long
Oklahoma.
North Oklahoma, they had to stop because of bad weather in Dallas. So
So
then
they
they finally got to Dallas, they missed their flight, so
Oh,
then they had to go to a new airline. They went to
Then they had
North
to-
Carolina,
Yeah,
oh my God.
and then they got delayed there, so it took 19 hours to get
You
home.
gotta wear the mask the whole time you're in those airports and airplanes. It's like, that's why I won't go anywhere right now. It's like, I can't do that. That's too long. My brother, his son lives in West Point, and they live in California. So it's a 6-hour drive or flight. And it's like, oh, I can't. No, thanks.
Yeah, Vincent just got out of Marine boot camp, and they had graduation there, but we didn't go because they only give them 3 hours to see the connection. And that was it, and they had to go. So I'm not flying all the way out there for 3 hours.
They did go to the whatever they call it, after the first 6 weeks or 8
Oh,
weeks. And if they couldn't go 5 miles from base, they had to do within 5 miles. So thank goodness Jake, John, and Tracy had gotten a hotel right on base.
Yeah.
So he got to come and she said he must have been tired. He walked in the hotel room, laid down, he was out. So they won't see him till, I think, Christmas, the way it is now.
that's when Tyler gets in.
Yeah. Otherwise, it's only 3 days. Well, it takes a day to fly both ways, so it's not worth flying him home, especially as expensive as it is now. I want to go out sometime in the next 4 years and just see where he is, but we'll see how things go.
Tyler's on that desert farm. 39 pounds, so it's in the desert.
Yep, yep. Ooh,
So
it is
we
hot.
called, we said, yeah, 105 today.
But it's dry. That's what they always say. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it can be dry, but it's still hot. Although my great niece is here, Audrey from Rapid City, she told me the other day, this humidity. And I said, I'm with you, hon. It's one thing that was hard to get used to, that
Sorry,
humidity.
You guys go. It's a good one. I'm excited about it. And yeah, cauliflower lunch, you guys are more than welcome to bring it up with you and sit here and eat while we're doing Bible
I'm gonna
study.
be here through LWML too, so I knew I couldn't wait that long.
Okay. So we're in Psalm 49 today. I brought with me my analytical key and my BDAG in case we run into a word issue that we really want to look up. Like there's a word that seems to be very rich in meaning. We can take some time and look it up and get a sense of it. So I have it. But we'll probably stick with the English text for the most part today as we work our way through. So, for those of you who are new to class, typically what we do is we talk about the type. Now, these are Gunkel classifications. He was a guy who I believe was writing in the late 1800s, and he had some theories as to, that because of the structures of the Psalms themselves, he kind of went through and he was pairing them into categories, that perhaps there were styles that we would have today, like, we write a form letter, we write maybe a letter to a loved one, we know how to write like a 3-paragraph essay, like these are structures that we're familiar with. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily the case, because what we're doing is we're assuming things because of the structures of things that we have. We're assuming that there was a structure. We don't know for certain. It could have just been that these things, because of the nature of the event that was being written about, or the author, right, that he fell into predictable patterns, not that this grand structure existed in Israel. They are helpful, though, because there are 150 Psalms. Sometimes it can be difficult to grasp onto what exactly we're looking at, and Psalms are poetic in nature, so sometimes it's hard to get what they're communicating. I think the classification thing is helpful in as much as we just have a handle to hold on to it, but we shouldn't get too bent out of shape about them and think that they're too important. So I give you this information just as a way to maybe remember the Psalm, way to classify it, and to remember like what we learned today. This is part of a small subset of Psalms. Now, I know there's quite a few there, but when you think about the grand number of Psalms, the lament Psalms especially are the largest category of Psalms. If you put together the personal and the communal laments. Now, the only difference between the personal and communal is that the personal is the lion's share. The communal laments would be basically the entire assembly is lamenting something that's happened, as opposed to an individual, right? But it's over 50% of the Psalms are lament Psalms. Wisdom Psalms provide guidelines, practical guidelines for godly living, give direction for righteous living in the pursuit of God's will. These Psalms do not exhibit a single formal pattern, but they share a number of characteristics, including the psalmist speaks of his words as wisdom, instruction, etc. He describes the fear of Yahweh. He addresses his hearers as sons. He warns, teachers, and uses figures. He warns, teaches, and uses figures, questions, and answer techniques, beatitudes, and descriptions of Yahweh's ways. Now, we'll notice number 4. You'll see number 4 actually happens in verse 5 of our psalm today. The psalmist literally asks the people reading the psalm or listening to the psalm a question. So you can see that. And I might refer back to that he addresses his hearers as sons. Think of this as perhaps whenever we're in wisdom teaching, you might think about a son being taught prior to his bar mitzvah. Or Jesus holding school. Now, there was a reason why they called him rabbi. There was a thing called rabbis. There were rabbis before Jesus. There were rabbis after Jesus. Rabbis became a thing after the exile. Primarily, all worship prior to the exile was done at the temple. The father of the household would do things like the Sabbath. He would teach his children the faith, right? But the kind of large-scale religious things happen in the temple. Now, they go off into exile, and they leave all of the temple worship behind because they're now in Babylon. So synagogue worship is also an outcropping of the exile. There was no synagogue worship before the exile. They come back, and they continue synagogue worship after the exile because it was very profitable. That we're going to be gathering weekly to teach and to learn as a group as opposed to individual family units. Now, the Lord would probably say, if you look at Deuteronomy chapter 6, the Lord would say primarily the teaching should be done by all fathers. And I think there's a reason for that. What is the best way to learn something really well? To teach it.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, this is something I've tried to recapture here at the congregation in terms of our catechesis. But it is something that if you don't ever have to teach the faith to your kids, how well are you going to learn it? And I might put this to you. How many of you remember your confirmation instruction? And why do you think that is? You know, I mean, a lot of people tell me, well, I haven't looked at this since I was in confirmation myself, Pastor. I said, well, see, that's a mistake, because you should be teaching your kids this stuff all the time. Even when they're older, you can teach your grandkids this stuff, right? And by teaching it, we become well versed in it. So I think synagogue worship, while it is maybe somewhat profitable, God's plans are always better. Most likely, God wanted fathers to teach their children so that the fathers themselves would remain faithful, as opposed to farming out this duty of education to someone else, which is what we still do to this very day, right? I still get parents who get irritated that I require parents to come with the children to confirmation. They just kind of want to drop them off and farm it out to pastor, and he's going to take care of it. That's not how this works, you know? So it's probably not great for us to do that. Number 3 in your thing on the wisdom psalms, he addresses his hearers as sons. So this idea of a rabbinical school where a master sat in salon, so to speak, teaching his people. And of course, there wouldn't have been any daughters here, right? Does that make sense? So like the idea of, so if we're to conjure up a first, when the psalm is written, you know, like a 2nd century BCE idea of learning, the idea that pops in our mind is a bunch of young men at a rabbi school sitting around the rabbi asking questions. Does that make sense? So I don't mean to say like this is how it should be. I'm saying this is the image that gets in their head. So the author says, he refers to it, right? This is how teaching is done, my sons, and then they listen, right? This is where this idea comes from. So we'll see that in our psalm as well today, okay? So this psalm is going to try to teach us something, and I think you're going to find that the idea, while not necessarily itself revolutionary, the psalm is definitely trying to teach us something about life today, okay? We're going to get into that. Really quickly, the Sons of Korah, the author of our psalm. The Korathites in the Bible were a portion of the Kohathites that descended from the Sons of Korah. They were an important branch of the singers in the Kohathite division. And of course, the one thing we should remember too is that the Kohathites are Levites, right? So you kind of keep going up the chain, you know. These are not Aaronic Levites, right? That's a different subset of Levites, but these guys are Levites, which means that they were intended by God to be taking care. You know, we find out upon the conquest of the land of Canaan, what are the Levites given? Remember this? All the tribes are given portions of land in the promised land, except for the Levites. They're given what? They're given the cities, and they're given the priesthood. So whereas other people make their living off of raising animals, sheep, crops, so on and so forth, the Levites subsist and exist by taking home portions of the sacrifices that are offered, right? Now, when we have a Holocaust offering, the offering is burnt up completely. But in a thank offering, a sin offering, I think there's also like a reconciliation offering. That's not the name of it, but that's what it's used for. These offerings, a portion of the animal is burnt, a portion is consumed, and then a portion is sent home with, or is given over to the priesthood. So we see in the parable of the prodigal son, the Levite is headed towards Jerusalem. Why is he headed towards Jerusalem? Most likely, it's his month to serve the temple, which means while he's serving there, that's when he's going to get paid, so to speak. Be able to bring those things home to his family so that they can subsist or survive on them. And then from our New Testament Bible says we talked about where priests would take the offerings, like the temple of Artemis in Ephesus. The silversmiths, it was a handy little business that was going on. There were silversmiths in town. They sold silver items. Artemis, the god of hunting and wildlife and fertility, she's a fertility goddess as well, accepted silver offerings as well as other kinds of offerings. If you're traveling into town and you want to leave an offering at the Temple of Artemis, which by the way was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient Greek world, you could buy a piece of silver, right? So the silversmiths get money. Now, you take that silver offering to the temple, you give it to the temple, what does the priest have at the end of the day? A bunch of pieces of silver. What does he do with the silver? He takes it back to the silversmith, he sells it back to the silversmith for money. The money that the silversmith got at the beginning of the day, most likely not the same amount that he got when he sold it. So the silversmiths are making out pretty well in this whole thing. And the priests are selling the offerings to support their livelihood, which is what the priests in the temple did in a way as well. They wouldn't necessarily have to consume, like a lot of times the priests would be given the front haunches of the animal, right? The rest would be burnt up. Priests wouldn't necessarily have to take that home. He'd go and sell that at a local meat market and take the money home. See what I'm saying? There are lots of ways in which the Levitical priests can support their livelihoods. These priests, the Kohathatites, are part of the Levitical priesthood. That makes sense because it's their duty to do the operations inside the temple, including music. Okay? Give you a sense of who's. Now, the Sons of Korah were basically like, I don't know if you knew this, but the Bach family, before Johann Sebastian came along, was known as a musical family. These people were writing music and were playing. They were known as, their house was seen as like basically a musician's guild. Like it was the family business. Does that make sense? So some families are coopers, some families are tanners, some families are wheelwrights and things like this, and you hand the family business down to the family trade. Well, Bach was the same thing, right? The music was the family business, and the Sons of Korah is the same idea, right? They're a family where music is their trade. That's what they do. They were composers. Usually, now we don't have any copies of the music, but usually when a song was written, it was also usually given some kind of, a lot like our hymns, where we have a lot of the same melodies. Our hymns are written we recognize melodies sometimes. Different hymns can use those melodies, those rhythm patterns, things like that, those the metrical patterns, right? Well, songs were written in the same way. Either they might have a melody that was written for that song specifically, or sometimes I don't think you guys have ever been in this class before. We've talked about it. There's a couple of songs that are said. It says in the beginning of the psalm, written for the gittith, or written according to the gaff, which was a type of music, or the gittith was a type of instrument. So because of the instrument, you assume a way in which it was played, you assume a meter, a speed, things like this. None of that music has come down to us since, but we retain the words, the lyrics, right? So Psalm 50, written by the Sons of Korah. And then I went ahead, Bonnie, and grabbed up that thing. They put it in the worksheet this time so everyone could have it. Bonnie's got a nice little book there. You might as well show it to them. It's a neat little book because it's got the Psalms, the devotional book, but it has a little blurb from Luther on every psalm.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I'll just read that to you for today. Psalm 49. The 49th Psalm is a psalm of instruction against the great God of the world, Mammon by name. The psalm rebukes as great fools those who trust in the world's God, in the worldly God's rule, and do not see that he cannot deliver them or himself from death. Therefore, it is truly better to rely on God, who delivers from death and gives eternal life, while they perish like the beast and leave all their goods behind, not knowing who will obtain it all. So you're going to see shades of other. If you're at all involved in the Proverbs Bible study on Tuesday morning, or if you ever studied the Proverbs, you're going to see a lot of things that are similar here. And also Jesus, who is we've talked about in the Proverbs class. Jesus is the epitome of wisdom. The fear of the knowledge of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And Jesus perfectly fears his Father. In other words, respects and follows what his Father tells him. He's perfect. So he is the epitome of wisdom. And Jesus tells us a story like this. Remember the man who built barns? The man who had a great harvest, so he built bigger barns to house his harvest, and then what happens? The next day, his life is required of him, and who's going to inherit all this stuff? Not the man, he's dead. Right? He cannot take it with him. So This is not a common or not an uncommon theme here that we're going to get into. Okay? So, verses 1 through 4, we have an appeal to hear wisdom, which I think we could attribute to the number 1 in our form at the top, right? Psalmist speaks his words of wisdom, instruction. Number 3, he addresses his hearers. He's trying to get them to listen. So 1 through 4 is kind of preparational, right? There's not a lot here, but it is to try to get people to listen. So let's do that. Hear this, all peoples. Give ear, all inhabitants of the world, both low and high, rich and poor together. My mouth shall speak wisdom. The meditation of my heart shall be understanding. I will incline my ear to a proverb. I will solve my riddle to the music of the lyre. Okay? So, probably verse 3 might be helpful. We have the word for wisdom. I'm curious. Yeah, Chokhmah. Yeah, that's what I expected. So Chokhmah is just a very basic understanding that it's not. In other words, it's not an unusual word. Chokhmah is a very normal word to use for wisdom. It's almost a gloss, one-for-one translation for wisdom. Unfortunately, the Israelites' pursuit of wisdom is not like ours. Being heavily influenced by Western culture, by Plato, and now in the modern Western culture that we live in, and our what's the word? Are being exposed to Eastern wisdom. When we hear the word wisdom, it takes on a very different meaning, right? Wisdom would be what? Traveling the world, knowing lots of things. Maybe a lot of people would see wisdom as being slow to anger, right? Someone who's very calm and patient in all circumstances. That would be kind of an Eastern way of thinking of wisdom, right? But I would say to you, a person who is wise, when they're confronted with evil, they don't, say nothing in the face of evil or sit there patiently. No, wise people deal with evil. So it's just what I'm saying, like, we are influenced a lot by Eastern culture, especially by Plato, things like this, to think that wisdom is one thing. Jews, however, think of wisdom as a fear and knowledge of the Lord, right? Of knowing his word, knowing his scriptures, knowing him. That's the pursuit of wisdom, right? And I would say to you too, if we start from the Bible presupposes certain things you can't get away from, right? The Bible tells us about God. And if what the Bible tells us about God is true, then the only thing we should care about is what God thinks is important. Literally, if you believe that Genesis 1 through 3 is true, then the only thing you should care about is what God thinks is true, right? If this God who created everything and has far more power than you and is your hope, right, like of something better, although he's perfect, I'm not, so there's a problem with salvation. We can talk about that later, right? But if this God is who he says he is, and I actually believe he is who he says he is, I shouldn't care about anything else other than what he tells me. Now that may seem very small and closed-minded, but it's very honest, isn't it? I mean, the only reason you would start worrying about things outside of what God tells you is if you don't actually think that God is the be-all and end-all of the entire universe. So make a decision. It really is. Either God is who he says he is or he isn't. And if he is who he says he is, then you shouldn't bother yourselves with things like Eastern wisdom or even things that Plato had to say. Although these things I think are probably good for us to be exposed to and to understand because they do influence the world. But these are not necessarily wisdom fonts that we should drink from. Fair enough? Yeah. So we have a really typical word for wisdom here, and the meditation of my heart. Don't overthink about meditation. I think the best definition of meditation is found in Deuteronomy 6. Okay, so let's just take a respite here for a moment and look at that. It's the Shema, and Moses tells us what we ought to be doing, right? 6:4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God. Deuteronomy 6, verse 4. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today, you shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Now, again, we're influenced by Western culture and Eastern culture, right? I should say not Near Eastern, but like near Eastern Oriental culture. So we think meditation is some kind of meditation in a Buddhist context, and in a East Orient context would be removing yourself from all external influences. This is what meditation is like. So meditation is a process of pulling yourself out of this world and receiving an enlightened consciousness, right? But that is not a godly, nor is it a Jewish idea, because God doesn't want you to pull yourself out of the world. What does he say? He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. How can you love your neighbor as yourself when you pull yourself out of creation? Can't do it, right? Meditation here does not mean any kind of yoga or Buddhist meditation. Meditation is exactly what the Shema says it is, right? It's like you're reading and you're talking about and you're thinking about God's word. When you lie down, when you rise, when you're walking, when you're sedentary, you think about God's word all the time. You meditate on it. One thing we talked a lot about in Christianity is what, how do they, I'm forgetting the phrase, but God's word is something that we routinely eat, right? We're living off of it. There's a phrase we always use when we're in worship. Now it's escaping me. Yeah, this process of we live by the word of God alone. We're constantly eating it and living by it. Okay, so don't let the word meditation throw you. This is what the psalmist means by meditation, right? I will incline my ear to a proverb. I will solve my riddle to the music of the lyre. So the lyre is often used in Psalms, in composition of Psalms. I'm not exactly sure what that means, other than it's a proverb and a parable. The actual word is not a proverb as we would understand. I'm sorry, parable as we understand, but I want to find the exact word here. Yeah, it's a mashal. A mashal is a word that Hebrews would probably use to describe riddles, parables, even the parables that Jesus tells. These would probably be mashals, right? Something that is teaching us something, a question, perhaps a story, and music of the lyre would be associated with worshiping or reading the Psalms. So perhaps the psalmist is trying to tell us these riddles don't come apart from revelation by God. That comes in worship, that comes in the liturgy, that comes in the temple, these kinds of things. So this is our introduction. I just thought it was interesting, by the way, I put it in my little tidbits, that this is a psalm that was in verse 1. The psalmist doesn't reach out only to Israelites, Hebrews, but actually the psalmist, he's calling out to everyone, all inhabitants of the world. Gentiles as well, not just Jews. I just think that's interesting that something that's so important. The Proverbs do this at times where they're not overtly religious. That sounds really crazy to say, but what I'm saying is there's meaning to be derived from the Proverbs, even if you weren't a Christian. Like you could read them and still get helpful things out of them. What is that? A fool, a wise man keeps his silence. A fool speaks and removes all doubt that he's a fool. Like so, these are like pithy things that anybody can learn something from, right? Probably the same thing is true here. He's calling out to all peoples that this is a worthwhile understanding. This is a worthwhile teaching moment. Everyone should listen, not just Jews. Okay? So here's our question that we're going to wrestle with for the rest of our time together. Why should I fear in times of trouble when the iniquity of those who cheat me surrounds me? Those who trust in their wealth and boast of the abundance of their riches. Okay? So Psalms very often, which is, I think, why they're so helpful, Proverbs as well, is they take a very honest look at the world around us. You know, a critical look. So here's the issue, right? The psalmist is saying, I think it's something we can identify with. The other psalms do this. The lament psalms especially do this a lot. Proverbs as well ask this question. Why is it that people who are foolish, or people who we could even make a case are evil, prosper? Right? Why do so many evil people, or let's say people who are apart from God, who do not love, we can at least say this, people who do not love God, prosper and are rich? It would seem to be the other way around, wouldn't it? I mean, why wouldn't God's chosen people, if they're God's chosen people, like if he has favor on them, why wouldn't they be favored in the world as well as by God? It doesn't seem to make sense. David does this often, but he usually meditates on the idea, like, why is it that powerful, rich people have the ability to do evil to me? I'm your appointed king. You anointed me. And David's got a point, right? I mean, it's like, God anointed him to be king. Why is it these people are allowed to go around and make his life miserable? It's not a bad question. But it's one that David constantly wrestles with. And it's probably one that we do as well. Okay? So going back to that, I think the question here is inheritance. Right? In an interesting way. Is there any napkins or those? I wipe my board up here. Yeah, just erase it. Getting lots of stuff. It kind of even goes with our sermon from last week, right? Where does our stuff come from? You know, who's watching out for us? Why is it that some people have so much more than other people? Should I be worried that people who don't love God have a lot of stuff and I don't? You know? So in other words, I think the psalmist is trying to get to a point here, which really, of course I've read ahead, so I know. The psalmist is trying to tell us that we ought to value what God gives as opposed to what the world gives. Because what God gives is eternal, what the world gives is not. Right? That's what he's trying to get at. So he's asking questions. Right? Like, it seems like rich people in this life are lifted up. They have power and authority over us. They have inheritance, and maybe they have a nicer earthly life. Why is this? Why does this happen? Why should I fear in times of trouble when the iniquity of those who cheat me surrounds me? So verse 5 makes us think that maybe something's going on. There's like possibly the psalmist's situation isn't fantastic, right? Like I'm not going through a great time, you know? And it is something I kind of poked on maybe last week during Bible study down here when we talked about the Old Testament lesson for a minute. It is the case that life can be one long laundry list of all things that God gives us and takes care of. And then the minute there's even the slightest little hiccup, right? When the check doesn't come in exactly when we expected, or our benefits program doesn't work like it's supposed to, or there's even the slightest little problem, then suddenly, woe is me, everything's falling apart. Why aren't you taking care of me, God? And God's like, I've been doing everything since day one. Well, one could say perfectly. And the minute the devil throws this slightest rock in your path, you fall apart. I can't help but think about Jesus' parable of the sower. Yeah. So these things, they sprint up in the shallow soil, but then the sun comes out and immediately they just wither. Or the thorns and the weeds choke them out. Right? They don't have a lot of strength in their convictions. Right? So bad things happen when the iniquity of those who cheat me surrounds me. I think Psalm verse 5 here is maybe important, the second part. Are you going to be done down and dirty? Occasionally, yeah. Is someone going to accuse you of something you haven't done, and are people going to believe the gossip as opposed to the truth? Yeah, it's going to happen. And just because bad people do bad things in a world filled with sin should not make us doubt our God. Because God promises vindication not during your life, but at the end of all things. And I think it's in that we have to hope in, which I think, by the way, is going to become a bigger and bigger hope for us every day as we move forward towards the end. I think we're seeing glimmers of how things are going to go already. You know, I mean, I think it kind of starts with the idea of vaccine passports, and it just keeps going until certain people in society are just not welcome. And then it goes on from there. In other words, I don't mean that's like the end. What I mean is, I think that we have to probably get used to the idea of our reputations being tarnished. I think a lot of us very much, it's an important thing to us. We don't want people thinking we're terrible people. That might be a reality of the times that we live in. Through no fault of our own, evil people are going to cheat, and they're going to make us look out to be terrible people. It's going to happen. But that does not invalidate the glory of our God and his love for us. Right? Let's continue on then. Those who trust in their wealth and boast of the abundance of their riches. I got somebody in my life who loves to tell me about all the vacations he takes. You know, like going all across the world and doing fancy vacations and this, that, and the other thing. He just loves telling me about stuff. I had another friend from high school who routinely loves to tell me about all of his investments and how his retirement is doing everything else. And I just want to sit and talk to him about my kids and talk to him about his kids and talk to him, you know, about things that I think matter as opposed to numbers on a bank account ledger somewhere. You probably all experienced this at one time or another, right? And the hardest part about it is that, well, of course, it's antithetical to believing the gospel, but it's also really hard to brag about the blessings that you have in Christ. Do you know what I mean? Like in that nature, like so. In other words, he's going to be like, well, you know, I went on this really great vacation. It was amazing. He's like, you know what? The other day, I was exhausted and I worked all day long, and then someone came to me, and then I had to, and then I got to take them down to the mission and make sure they were taken care of. It was awesome. You see what I'm saying? Those two things, like they don't. But that is an amazing, you know, being gifted with awesome opportunities to serve the Lord. You know, however long the Lord decides to take in order to come, there will come a day when we will stand next to our Lord after being judged. And I do not think we will ever look back at all the time we spent helping or serving someone else and regret it. Do you know what I mean? Meanwhile, all those vacations and all those times, not that they're necessarily, I don't want to say like vacationing and taking respite is not right. It's good. We need respite. The Lord took respite. But no matter how great vacation is, it's going to pale in comparison to that first day we walk out into the new heavens and new earth. It really is. And that's going to be forever. It's going to be forever. You know, it's going to be the greatest thing we've ever experienced. We're going to kind of wonder to ourselves, boy, you know, we'll be free from sin. So we'll be free from regret and doubt and those kind of things as well. But I wonder if we could be there for a moment and think about what we've valued in our life and what we've put our resources behind. We might question it. you know? Okay. So we're into our second section here, the insights about the preciousness of human life. This is verses 5 through 9. Those who trust in wealth and boast of the abundance of their riches, truly no man can ransom another or give to God the price of his life. For the ransom of their life is costly and can never suffice, that he should live on forever and never see the pit. Now, just so in case you're not aware, Hebrews often talk about death and hell kind of simultaneously. It's a very different way that they look at it. Of course, Jews believe in the resurrection on the last day, but they also believe that dying, you go down into the grave and you're in Sheol, away from God, right? So there's this idea of a intermediate state is probably not a huge factor in Hebrew theology. They're waiting more for the new heavens, new earth, the last resurrection, right? But the point is this, you go down, Sheol is seen as a bad place or a hard place because you're far away from God. You're as far away from God as you can go. Jonah goes down into the whale, and he says he's in Sheol, and the whale goes down to the deepest parts of the ocean. Jonah in proximity is as far from where he thinks his God is as he can possibly be, right? And the distance is what makes it hell. Yeah. So the question, the point is that this man can brag about their wealth and their riches. They can brag about their earthly situation. But no matter how much riches they have, this is a really basic thought, right? You can't buy your way out of death, right? You can't save your life. Eventually, time is undefeated, right? Time is undefeated. He always comes to get you. So you can't beat what's that? What's the name I was given for death? The Grim Reaper. You can't beat the Grim Reaper. He's always coming for you. He won't relent, right? It's interesting too. I wrote down here this idea of ransom. Truly, no man can ransom another. Well, no man can, but God can, in the form of man. God can come down and be in the form of man, and he can die, but his sacrifice is such that he can pay to ransom all mankind. It's just a really, it's a really interesting thought here about, no man can do this. And I think Paul picks up on this, right? In Romans, he's talking about this very idea that perhaps a good man might die for another man, right? But he's kind of pointing out that it's really not going to change anything, One man can't die for everyone, but Jesus can. And that's the point Paul comes to. It's like one man maybe, if he's real hypothetically perfect, can die for another man and save that man's life, but he can't save everyone's. Only Christ can do that. Okay. That he should live on forever and never see the pit. I think when we lived a more natural life and we didn't have as many health intercessions that we do now, I think the idea of living forever was kind of a cool idea, right? Because I don't think we had the kind of death that, like when this is written, 2nd century BCE or the time of Christ, or even colonial America, right? People usually would get older, they would get infirm, they would lay down in their bed, and they would die. The process of dying was a short one. It wasn't prolonged for days on end. But unfortunately, with the advent of antibiotics and breathing treatments and what's the word I'm thinking of, like things that kill bacteria, like astringents, stuff like that. We have people who live in this period very close to death for days, even weeks, right? I don't know what's better. Do you? I mean, perhaps it was better to die maybe a little normally. So the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. These things are very wonderful in life, not so great at the end of life. The Lord giveth, the Lord. I mean, you want this wonderful thing. It's really great, but it's a two-edged sword. It's got detractions as well as it's got benefits. And I'm not saying that medical science is wrong, right? I think we should just be willing to admit that every time we push the boundary forward, we also create unseen implications that we didn't intend. We didn't realize. Like you think the guy who invented the breathing machine ever thought about the implications of what a breathing machine would do? Right? So now, when you put someone on a breathing machine, it's not God taking someone. I have to make the decision to turn the machine off. And the implications of that are all mixed around now. Now I'm going to leave Grandma dying, feeling guilty and wondering if it was God's choice or my choice, right? So before that, of course, this thing was far simpler than it was now. But at the same time, it saved countless numbers of lives. It's not a bad thing. It's just in this sinful world, anything comes with both benefits and detractors. It's just how it is. So, the idea of living forever, perhaps when you're dying quicker, seems like a great idea, but I would offer up this idea. Who would want to live forever like this?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we get to the older stages of our lives. Not that I'm there, but I've been around a lot, so I think I don't understand it, but I know a little bit about it. Right? You have knee replacements, you have hip replacements, you have various treatments you're doing to make sure you can get by. But let's be honest, your body doesn't work exactly like it used to. There are creaks and there are pains, there are aches, and it's not as enjoyable as it once was. Now, draw that out to like possibly think about this. Living as you are, with your body kind of fixed or replaced as needed for 1,000 years. Does that not sound awful?
Yeah.
And of course, Alzheimer's is a thing that comes along because we're extending life. Right? We weren't living long enough, I think, for Alzheimer's to even be an issue, except for like early onset Alzheimer's. But now, of course, it almost seems like there are these booby traps, right? And every time we push life expectancy further down the road, another booby trap springs, and it's like maybe God trying to tell us, like Tower of Babel. Remember, there's this really great painting of the Tower of Babel where it's a spiral construction. And you can see that the way they're building it is slowly starting to turn sideways. And eventually, it'll get curved over enough where it'll fall over by itself. And so as we're trying to extend and extend and extend, it's like we're kind of undoing it as we're doing it. You know what I mean? I don't think it's a great idea to live forever. I wouldn't want to live forever. It sounds kind of miserable, to be honest with you. So, this is what the rich man wants. This is what the man who is in power wants. He wants to control his life. He wants to extend his life on his terms, right? That's what living a life devoted to man is. Life might be easier devoting ourselves to man. We could have the houses we want. We could do whatever we want on Sunday mornings or Saturdays or Wednesdays or whenever we go to church. We could devote all our money. I mean, think about it over your lifetime. You took all the money you give to the church and put it somewhere else. You could probably buy yourself maybe a lake home, right? So all these things, they sound really good. This is what it is that you want to control your life on your terms. You want to live as you want to live. You want to chase after what you understand as pleasure. And then you want to prolong that pleasure as long as possible. Mammon is your God. You just want to live this cushy, pleasurable life as long as possible. By the way, it sounds like young people right now, doesn't it? Right? Like people between their 20s and 30s, like that there can never possibly be any painful parts of life. One of the things that frustrates me is like every time I started working with youth, and every time I suggest that the youth maybe do a service project or they should work or do something, right? And parents are like, well, that's not what youth groups are. I was like, well, are we trying to disciple these kids? Are we trying to teach them how to become members of the congregation? Life isn't always fun. It's hard. In fact, I would say, having been an adult for a little while, life as you become an adult is more hard than it is fun. I mean, literally, in terms of time concentration, you spend more time doing the hard stuff and less time doing the fun stuff so that your kids can do the fun stuff. That's probably their age in life, right? But to think that my life is going to be pleasure all the time, this is this idea of like why you have ghosting and people who won't work jobs. They literally, like, the employment benefits have run out. They won't go back to work. Why? Well, you couldn't pay me enough to do that work. Well, I'm sorry. What's the problem here? It's a good wage. Well, I don't like it. Well, who said work was supposed to be something you like doing? Who said that? Who said? In other words, this is what's at the root of this. They want to enjoy themselves all the time. That's not life. That's eternity. And you're mixing up the two things. Life is hard because there's sin in the world. Period. Anyway, so this is what they want, right? Verse 10 then, I think we'll probably just get down to verse 10. We'll have to catch the rest next time. We'll do verse 10 through, what's my next break here? We'll do 10 through 12, and then we'll stop there. For he sees that even the wise die, the fool and the stupid alike must perish and leave their wealth to others. Their graves are their homes forever, their dwelling places to all generations, though they call lands by their own names. Man in his pomp will not remain. He is like the beasts that perish. Right? So I think we're getting to maybe an understanding. Go back to verse 5 again, right? Why should I fear in times of trouble when the iniquity of those who cheat surrounds me? Those who trust in their wealth and boast of the abundance of their riches. In other words, why do rich, powerful people cheat and abuse the downtrodden, abuse the poor, abuse people they can? Well, I think the answer is right here. He sees that even the wise die. The rich man in his strength, in his power, in his money, who wants to live forever, he looks around and sees, well, everybody dies no matter what they tried to do. There's no answer to death. Well, there's no answer they would agree with, right? But there's an answer to death, but the problem with the answer to death goes back to the beginning, right? What does this man want? He wants to live in pleasure all his days. What does God require? That this man sacrifice for his neighbor all his days. And this is why the rich man doesn't like the answer for death, because he doesn't like the God who gives it, because he doesn't want to do what that God actually calls him to do. Right? He just rejects it. Now, I would say that the benefits that God gives far outweighs the things that he actually asks us to do. This is a God of gospel, grace, compassion, and mercy. But even these slight things that man is asked to do, he resists, because he is by nature a rebellious, stiff-necked person. Thanks be to God that God has given us the Holy Spirit to listen to God and not be stiff-necked. You know what I mean? Okay, so just some little cleanup here then, right? The fool and the stupid alike must perish, along with the wise. This is everybody. Now, there's a difference between fool and stupid. If you were going to my Proverbs class, that's something we actually talked about. A stupid person would be someone who literally does not have computative power. So someone who just doesn't have the IQ that normal people have. That would be someone who's stupid. The fool is someone who does have the brain pan, but just goes the wrong direction every time they give it an opportunity. We see lots of people like this who are brilliant and just make really poor choices, right? I mean, the lion's share of scientists who do stellar research and various things like this, they are not Christian people. And most of the time what I find is it's almost more so because of peer pressure and job security than it is about real science. Because you look at the design of man, the design of creation, the design of the universe, the specificity of Earth, and the fact that there's one planet with all the characteristics it needs to support life. And it seems like every time we keep talking about Earth, planets that are like Earth, well, there's never any idea that there's anything there. We haven't received any messages. We don't know of any other place supporting Earth, even though they're like Earth. These people are the information is put right in their face that this place has been designed, and they refuse to listen to it. That's a fool. That's a fool. So 11, their graves are their homes forever. Their dwelling places to all generations. So who would this be talking about? Their graves. Who's the they? I think our psalm is going to show us that the people who don't trust in God, who don't seek after wisdom, yes, their graves will be their homes forever, but not those who trust and believe in God, who trust Yahweh. Okay? Though they called lands by their own names. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to what this is? There's a guy in town who really likes naming stuff after himself. As though putting our names on things is going to mean that we'll live on forever. You know, Denny Sanford has done a lot of good things. I'm not gonna say he hasn't. But Denny Sanford is going to go down to the grave just like everybody else. And 1,000 years from now, if the earth is still around, I really doubt that all these places will still be called the Denny Sanford Center. Right? Even time can even wipe away monuments carved into stone. I'll give you a really funny example. When I was a UND student, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was very adamant that the UND held on to its Sioux logo. So he carved it. He made stone impressions that were like colored pieces of stone, and he put the Sioux logo all over the arena in stone, like all over 50 times, just to put through a point that he did not want UND to change the mascot. UND changed the mascot. We got grinders out, and they ground out every single one of those things, and they're gone. There's a better example. Did you know about this? There was a female pharaoh. And there's some intrigue as to how she became pharaoh. But after she was usurped by her uncle, he went and they broke every carving of her face that had been done in all of Egypt. They broke down every monument she ever made. They basically erased her from history. And the only reason we know about her is because one carving of her face was in a tomb somewhere. It survived, and we have a copy of it now. But otherwise, there's no more existing copies. This is what I hold it out as a point to say, even if you carve your name in stone, you put your name on lands, you put your name on buildings, time will carve you away. There's only one way to live forever, and that is in God. Yeah? Man in his pomp will not remain. He is like the beasts that perish. Animals that die out in the fields. And you can see, if any of you have ever gone hunting or ever gone walking in the wilderness, you come upon antlers and bones of animals. I think this is what he's getting at. This is an idea of like carrion, like carcasses. Man is like this. We'll die and we'll fall apart in the desert. We'll pick up there next time, because I wish we would have got to it. Next time we'll start off with the psalmist's answer. And the answer to this is to trust in God. So we'll talk about that next time. We'll finish off Psalm 45, 49. And if I can find some more tidbits, I'll bring them to you at that time, next Thursday. Have a wonderful day, you guys.
Thank you. Esther, I heard about that female pharaoh in Egypt.